Okay, Ed, have I hit the record button properly?
Yes, you have.
Oh, good. Okay, welcome to all those who are listening or watching on the recording. Okay, so as I was saying, we're going to look at some text having to do with uh, healing. We're going to finish the ones that has an interesting question, which was, you know, first of all, you got to think about how seriously that the Rabbinical Assembly devoted a full teshuvah to the question, when should a person come off the Misha Barak list? And we talked last time, some of us go to synagogues where they have these very long lists. I think that's probably less common today, but it was very common to have a list. Actually, while I was the rabbi at the Fallon Jewish Center Congregation in Israel, I did keep a printed list on the Bima, which we read from. Now we have the pattern of the rabbi or cantor going around and asking people to add names. Those are possibilities. When we actually we were looking at the question, you know, of let's go down. So we'd gotten to, yeah, we had just finished looking at this question of chronic and mental ill. And I could, sadly, I can name several people in the congregation who I know are chronically ill, whose illnesses are not going away. They may or may not be fatal or terminal, but they are serious mental ills or physical ills that are going to remain in their lives. And so the question was raised, uh, are should we, are we going to pray for them refuat hanefesh or refuat haguf, a healing of the soul and the body, when we know that's not going to happen? So there were some uh, suggestions of alternative Misha Berach, um, and we looked at that, and then I think we ended with the question of a terminally ill person and whether or not that was a tefillat shav, a vain prayer. In other words, the classic examples we saw in the Talmud um, is that you don't pray with something in the past. One whose wife was pregnant, and he says, "May it be God's will that my wife gives birth to a boy." It's a vain prayer because it's either a boy or a girl. And now of course, nowadays for most people that's not necessary because they can find out whether it's a boy or a girl. How early could they do that nowadays? I don't even know. Anyone know that answer that question?
Sure.
Fairly early.
Early
I,
on.
By 12 weeks, maybe?
12 weeks, that sounds reasonable. I just remember when Rhonda was pregnant with Gabe, the type of pictures you had on an ultrasound were like a bunch of blurry dots, and that's it. And nowadays, you really can see an outline of the body and clearly indicates whether it's a boy or a girl. And I guess they could even do genetic testing of some sort that would even determine even before it's clear on an ultrasound.
And
Uh,
Richard, when our son was born, they had a stethoscope. And that's it. They just
yeah,
could listen if there was a heartbeat, and that was it.
right. That's a heartbeat, and that's it. That's
No
all you can
ultrasound.
tell. And nowadays, we have these crazy reveal parties.
Well, pretty soon they'll be able to choose what do you want, a boy or a girl, before it happens.
That's an ethical question in and of itself, right?
Right.
I don't think we've talked about that one, which is it ethical to choose whether you want a boy or a girl? What does that say about our society and about individual choice, and how far should that extend? But we won't. Maybe some point we'll talk about that, but that's an important ethical question. Not, I mean, even more significant are ethical questions. Not only choose the gender, but the question of what happens when the technology advances to the point where we can choose more of the genetic makeup of a baby. But we'll hold off on that. Hold off on that. But here's the question about a person who is terminally ill. And then we looked at this. He said, um, that praying for miracle is not allowed. If someone is brain dead, of course, And there's even a suggestion at the bottom of this teshuvah for for a terminally ill person, right? Well, I think we looked at it. May the Kadosh Baruch Hu have mercy upon him, send him from the heavens the blessing of peace, tranquility, quiet, and security. Notice not what is said here, but not for healing. Ed, you have a comment?
Yeah, comment on you mentioned brain dead. You know, uh, my son-in-law's uncle had a heart attack in the street, and they found him, and he revived him a couple of times. And I'm not sure how long he was in the hospital, but he had no brain function. And today he's walking around 80% of what he was before.
So that's well, he was never brain dead.
Well, no sign of brain waves. That's what they call brain dead.
So you're saying he was brain dead.
He was brain dead. He was on, life support systems
Okay. But
for
he came back.
some period of time, and he
Right.
came back. And today he's 80% of what he was before the incident.
Okay, that again, I'm no doctor, obviously. My understanding is that's fairly rare, but yes, so here's a question where
Yes.
came back from that. And as we know, medicine is not an exact science, and people say, oh, you have so long to live, even with hospice care, which is supposed to be 6 months, uh, it's not exact. These are tricky questions. So it's a wonderful story to hear. So we have this, but this prayer, which was written by Rabbi Robert Scheinberg, asks someone who is terminally ill for the healing of the soul, strengthening the spirit. And it does not say, and it says, may God strengthen those who are taking care of his needs, as well as his dear family whose souls are bound up together. We hope and pray that healing is at hand. We hope, not a real straight out prayer that this person is going to get better. So that's something that could be said. I have been at the bedside of people who are terminally ill and said something like this, as well as final prayers that are said. And here's something, remember, we also said, and as I say to people, Rabbi, please pray for my uncle. I'll pray for your uncle, but you too should pray for your uncle. And there's a place for that, as we noted in the Amida. You watch over his time of need. Okay. May God strengthen all those who are taking care of his needs, as well as his dear family whose souls are bound up together. Again, not specifically saying that we're hoping for that person to be healed. Okay, so let's go back. Where were we? Oops. Oh, okay, here's the question. Let me ask you this. When should you take somebody off the Misha Berach list? What do you think? Comments? When should somebody come off the Misha Berach list? Ed?
I don't think they should come off the Mishra Bayrak list if you're not,
He's dead.
if you're, what was that, Fran?
When he is dead.
When they
Exactly.
die.
I,
And
I,
that's why
Okay, let Ed finish and then Fran. Okay, Ed and then
I,
Fran.
well, thank you, Fran. I agree 100% with Fran, but I mean, if they're terminally ill and you don't, maybe you're praying for a cure, not a miracle, but a physical cure.
Mhm.
And the way science is moving these days, I think I mentioned it last week about this one girl that had terminal rare
Right.
form of leukemia and one shot of genetics, and she was
Yeah.
100% cured. So, I mean, that's a one-off, but
right.
Right. I think that she was in the New York Times Science section today about about that. I had seen it earlier. Okay, Fran, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that I agree with Ed, and that story that he just told us proves it, that you should never pray for, you should always pray for their recuperation.
Okay.
You never know.
Okay, Carol,
You know.
do you want to comment?
I was going to say that once they are no longer critically ill, they can come off the prayer list.
That's a good question. Actually, this came up in my rabbinic discussion group on the online, and I'll talk from personal experience, right? Because there was a long time where I was very, very sick, as you all know, and I was very, very pleased to know that all people were praying. But my recovery was rather lengthy. It took about a year or so. And I would come, and finally, after I don't even remember how long it was. Was it 6 months? Was it 8 months? At some point, I started coming back to Shabbat morning services at the synagogue.
Right.
I was physically able to do that, but I wasn't fully healed yet. Uh, and while I was there, people were still adding my names to the Mishaberach list, right? Which I also appreciated. So there's also this issue of healing and recovery. When you're still in recovery in the hopes that your recovery will be full, then I would say you stay on. I was happy to be on the list for a year. That was fine with me because that's about how long it took for me to recover. And you're never sure how well someone's recovery might go. And here we have, the short answer to this question is when a person passes away. Okay, we had that. Or when they say so, i.e., okay, I got better, you can take me off the list. Carol?
I was recently, 2 weeks ago, I spent 5 days in the hospital.
Oh,
Um, there are still medical issues, but I'm no longer seriously ill. I'm now off the communal prayer list, which I
okay.
think is appropriate.
Okay. You're fine with that decision. Your recovery is pretty much almost done, right? It's at that point.
There are still issues, but
Correct.
I don't think I need to be on that list anymore.
Okay, but that's also a good a sense that you know that. Did you make that? Did you tell people take me off the list?
I spoke to my rabbi about it, yes.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, Rini?
I have a cousin, I think I might have mentioned this, who has liver issues, needed a transplant, couldn't get one, and they came up with some other way to keep her functioning and alive. And she's pretty fully functional. And I said to her, should I take you off my Mishaberach list? I was saying a Mishaberach for her for about 10 years. And she said, no, please keep me on because I am chronically ill and I would like to stay on. So there's another way of looking at it.
Sure.
And our rabbi often says, when she talks about the Mishaberachs, as I said last week, we don't have a list, but she says she prays for not only complete healing, but enough healing. So that's another different attitude. Enough healing that, like Carol, that you are functioning and you expect to be healed. And
Right.
she also prays for the doctors and nurses who take care of people,
Mhm.
so they can
Caregivers.
heal.
Sure. 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 So we do have people who have as I said, as you pointed out, long-term conditions, chronic conditions. Uh, Someone on dialysis. Should they remain uh, on that list? Dialysis goes on for a while, but dialysis is not forever. Um, so that's also someone who would be on the list. But also they say when they say so, right? A community should have a regular practice of reaching out to people on the list or those who ask that the names be on the list. First and foremost, to ask after the welfare of the person, ask about support, and also making calls to find out if that person wants to be on the list or should come off the list. He points out that in a case of a community passively listening to a long list of names can be considered a tircha ditzibora and therefore avoided. In other words, if someone gets off the list and they never get off the list because someone asks the rabbi, please put this person on the list, and the rabbi doesn't even know who it is, that can create a list that is being read and just goes on and on and on. She said, reading a long list of names should also be avoided because how we enact prayer in our community is a living manifestation of our theology. Reading a long communal list of names risks saying that things about prayer and God that we do not mean. Why? If the communal list is collected by the synagogue staff, it inevitably includes names of people who are unrelated to the community, of people present at any particular Shabbat morning. So, in other words, I mean, probably many of us could think of long lists of names of people who that were related to or were friends of, and it could be, as they pointed out, a tzirka de tzibura, something that may be avoided. It is acceptable for the prayer leader to pause to ask people to add names. Another option is to go around the room and ask people to say the names, which is what we do. It's interesting that he points out some congregations also ask people to add their relationship to the person they are praying for as well. As a matter of fact, I remember, I think it was Rabbi Salston at our synagogue. Was it Rabbi Salston? You know, I'll tell you the truth. I'm sorry, don't remember. One of the rabbis who asked each of us who said names to say who they were. Do you remember that? I'm not making this up.
I don't know.
That happened once. Did it only happen once?
I don't know.
I remember.
I don't remember her saying that. I remember her reading off lists and lists and lists.
No, I remember very specifically her asking us to say who we were related to, and I remember specifically because two of the people I'm reading the names off, and some of you may know that I get up every Shabbat morning, and there are two names that have been on the list for a long, long time. Are two of the other two of the remaining members of my Northern New Jersey support group for people with multiple proliferative neoplasms, i.e. the type of blood cancers that I suffered from. So I really thought that was a good idea to say, who they were. But that's up to the synagogue. Okay. Then he goes on, and yeah, in an effort to balance the challenges of keeping up with those whose names are on the list, many congregations reset their Misha Beirach list regularly, i.e., we say once a month we take the names off. Think that's a good idea?
No.
There is no set amount of time for someone to remain on the list. There are several different customs. Some have a custom of doing it every month on Rosh Chodesh, or twice a year on Pesach on Rosh Hashanah. Whatever the reset frame is, it is advisable to determine a reset routine that can make sure that the list is up to date while not becoming too long. I mean, if the congregation sent out in its publicity, okay, this is Pesach, then everyone comes off the list. And you got to call to bring it back on. You like that pattern? I heard some people don't like that. Yeah, Rini, yeah, like it or
I
don't
don't
like
like the list at all.
it? Okay, you don't like the list at all. Okay, we don't do the list anymore, right? I don't know when did that stop? I don't remember.
They publish it in the Insider.
That's
Ah,
true. The
Yes,
our
they
weekly newsletter does have a list of people who we are
right
looking
each
up
week.
for, but we don't say that list out loud. It's a long list,
Yes.
but we don't
I
read it
think
out loud.
people who have people they're praying for should make the effort to be there in person at some point, either Friday night or Saturday morning or whatever, just to put a name on a list. You're not doing anything.
That's
You're
right.
you're not doing anything. You're not praying for that person. You have absolved your responsibility and let other people take it. So we don't have a list, and I really like not having a list.
Right. We don't have a list either that's said out loud on Shabbat morning. anyone who comes to the services on our Shabbat morning feel that what we do is a good pattern? We don't have a list. Who's ever there gets up and says names. Charlie, what's your?
Yeah, when you announce a name, it also lets everyone present in the congregation know that that party has some kind of sickness or issue, which is telling the people that this person is sick. Very
Right.
often we don't know who's sick and who isn't sick. We don't know who's in the hospital or who is not in the hospital. So this is an alert to the public that someone is ill and we should call them or whatever.
Right. Well, just assuming the person wants that known, right?
Right.
If we
Right.
say the
Yes.
Hebrew name, if we say Moshe ben Rachel,
Yeah.
we don't know who that is.
Yeah, there would be a privacy issue there.
Yeah,
Right.
we have the HIPAA laws. Actually, I will, if you're ready for this one, in Nashville, Tennessee, prior to the HIPAA laws, we got calls from the hospital. The hospital proactively called us. There were four major hospitals in downtown Nashville. Well, not downtown, but near each other in Nashville. And they told every synagogue the names of all the Jewish patients that they had in their hospital that week. And that list was printed and distributed on and available on Shabbat morning. So you'd get there was a little 3x5 card. It said Vanderbilt Hospital, St. Thomas, Baptist, and Centennial. Those are the four major ones. And it had the list of all the Jews. And it's interesting that A, they stopped doing that. B, there was not a question of consent, which was always a problem. And of course, C, there was the other problem, which was, I think I've mentioned before. Somebody could be on that list with their real name, a name that nobody knew them by, right? which occasionally would happen. People would have nicknames, and I had trouble with that twice when I went to visit people at the hospital, and I asked for, Bobby Shepherd. His real first name, of course, was Emmanuel. So, it became difficult for them to tell me where he was. So that practice, the HIPAA laws have stopped that. The HIPAA laws are very now restrictive in finding out who's in the hospital. Okay, last.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I just took a quick look. There's only 15 people on our list on the published in the Insider.
On the Insider. Okay, and the assumption is that are all those names with Hebrew and or English names?
Mostly Hebrew. There's a couple, I think, with the English name. I don't remember.
Okay, so many of them may be there, and we're just not sure who they are, right? Which again would be the choice of the person who is ill. There are people, as well I know, as I mentioned before, it's always the patient's choice whether or not they want people to know they are ill.
I think the reason for it is that they have a policy that you have to renew the name every 2 weeks.
Oh, good. Okay, there. I did not know that, but that's a good policy.
Yeah.
That's a good policy that people should know, and that it's the patient's choice whether or not the illness is publicly mentioned. Okay, yes, Rini.
I have a question about everyone's opinion of making a general prayer. We had a member of our congregation who used to, when we did the Mishaberach, he would say, all those injured in Ukraine without naming anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And our rabbi really requests that you only name people you know, not a blanket. And I'm wondering what your opinion or other people's opinion.
That's a good. There is actually a member of our congregation who also occasionally, and I think you all know what I'm talking about, who will occasionally say something, all those injured in Israel or all those injured in the recent hurricane, things of that nature. She's, I think, the one person who does that.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think? Any comments?
I think it should be personal. I don't think we should have a blanket reproach line. I think it should be very specific to a person.
Okay, that's one. Anyone else say anything?
Well, I think also when we do say the name of the person, I think the person who is making the Mishaberach, they should all stand through the whole that part of the service. I don't think you should just get up, mention a name, and sit down.
Okay, well, again, these are issues. And Fran, do you think the person should say the relationship of that person? My uncle, my father, my cousin, whatever.
Well, I don't know. It would be, I guess it would be nice, but it's very emotional. And sometimes people can't get there.
Okay.
So they just say the name, whatever.
Yeah.
But I really feel that they should stand through the whole thing.
Yeah, I went that day that we asked for the names, and I mentioned the names of those other two people, the remaining alive members of my support group. I felt that was a very emotional moment as well. Well, members of our congregation, when the new rabbi comes in next year, maybe you want to have a discussion with him or her about the best pattern for the Misha Roth. There have been some ideas suggested here. We'll see. So anyway, here is the the Pesach, in other words, the legal ruling. Here's the conclusion of this committee. Individuals can consider themselves healthy and therefore no longer need of praise or healing. Nevertheless, we should include whoever asks us, okay? Right? We may pray for whoever we think needs healing, but a person must give consent. Consent must be included, whether that person's name should be said in Hebrew or English, their relationship. Okay, if the sick person is unable to give consent, then it can be granted by a loved one. Otherwise, the privacy must be respected. It is appropriate to include those with chronic or mental illness with the communal Misha Barak. Misha Barak prayers have been composed for these or other specific illnesses may be used. I mean, it's really hard to say. You get up and say, "Oh, Rabbi, please do a Misha Barak for mental illnesses for my uncle." I don't know if people are going to do that in a public setting, right? Community chooses to consider. Okay, so that's maybe that's more of a private prayer, I would think. One may recite a Misha Ber for his terminally ill, but be advisable to pray for the person's and their family's needs. I can see that. A community should determine a fixed time to reset their communal list. Okay, any comments on those final words about the Misha Berach list?
Our list does specify every 2 weeks to renew it.
It does say that on it's on the Insider, right?
Yes, on the inside.
Right, the Insider is our weekly email, which is sent out once a week. It's weekly. That's true. Okay. All right. Any other comments before okay, we're finished with this, and we're going to start this new unit, which has become. We spoke a little bit about this 6 or 7 years ago. Everyone remember that? I don't. And it's a question that has, of course, become increasingly contentious in our country, and that is vaccinations, right? Vaccinations in the modern sense as we know it, as a communal, in Europe began in the 18th century, I think it was 1796, when Jenner first noticed that I think it was a woman who milked the cows had cowpox, and she never got smallpox. So he said, well, what if I injected people with the cowpox? And he tried it on someone. By the way, they did not have scientific ethical committees that could tell him whether or not to do this, right? It was not a question of whether his research was supported by a national organization. He just on his own saw this, and he injected a boy with the cowpox. He got a little ill, and then afterwards he exposed him to smallpox, and he didn't get smallpox. And that was in the in Europe, the late 19th century. It seems, and I didn't bother to put this up onto the sources, that was somewhat known in other parts of the world prior to that. In Africa and in China, there was some knowledge of that. But the Europeans started doing that and really became sort of a public policy in the 1840s, the 1850s in the United States, to the point where at this moment, because it became public policy and was supported during the Cold War by the United States and the Soviet Union, smallpox has been eradicated. That's the short history of the origins of public health issues with vaccines. Today, we are seeing all sorts of issues of public health and vaccines. And I wanted to start, where are we? Let's find this again. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay. I have to go to here first, and then we go to there. Okay, there we go. Okay. Everyone see the screen share now? Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty big. You should be able to see that fairly clearly. So I found, as you know, who just retired, Rabbi David Golinkin. We have seen many of his rabbinic opinions over the course of this class, and he has published extensively for the Rabbinical Assembly. He is actually he was the head of the seminaries school in Jerusalem, and this is one of his teshuvot. Does halacha require vaccination? Now that's a hot topic in parts of the country today against dangerous diseases such as measles, rubella, polio, COVID-19. There's even some questions now about hepatitis B. If you've been following, just today there was something in the paper about the recommendations, hepatitis B and HPV. What should be the official governmental policy? So here is the question of, does Jewish law require that to happen? And so this is 2001. That is after the beginning of the COVID was 2019? 20, okay. March 2020, right?
Started at the end of
Yep.
2000.
Yeah. But the public measures were not put into place until March, correct? That's my
Yes.
Correct.
March 2020. Okay. So this is less than a year after the pandemic. I don't remember when some of the restrictions were lifted, but this is January. It was approved by a vote of 13-0. In other words, a unanimous approval, voting against none, abstaining none. Okay. So here's the question. First asked before the COVID-19 pandemic. In recent years, we have witnessed a growing phenomenon of Jews and non-Jews who refuse to receive common and accepted vaccine or to give their children vaccines against measles, rubella, polio, and other contagious diseases. This is, 6 years ago. If anything, this, of course, has increased significantly. This question has become even more acute as we begin to vaccinate against COVID-19 virus, which has already killed more than 1,760,000 people worldwide. Does halacha require vaccinations? How does Jewish law relate to those who endanger the lives? Note, again, we always have to notice how the question is being asked, right? And notice how the question is being asked. They are assuming, I believe correctly, to those who endanger the lives of others by refusing to be vaccinated. So, it's not being asked, what about people who refuse to be vaccinated because of personal autonomy, right? Judaism, first of all, does not believe in total autonomy, but that's often a argument. He's taking, that's off the table, total personal autonomy. This is a community. It's being asked in the communal sense. They endanger the lives of others by refusing to be vaccinated. May they be prevented from entering schools, synagogues, or public places, right? I just remember as a kid getting all the vaccines and the schools required it. Hebrew schools, I guess, just assumed that they were being required by the schools that the children attended, so they didn't even have to have or think about these types of things. Okay, so here's his response. The Jewish attitude towards physicians and medicine. Well, we already read that, right? So he says, in a previous response, which we read, I surveyed the Jewish attitudes toward the main opinion accepted we have learned that now this is he's being very technical, and the example he's using is your classic John Doe. Remember, Reuven and Shimon are John Doe in starting in the Talmud, or Ploni ben Ploni, but Reuven and Shimon are John Doe, right? If Reuven vowed not to receive benefit for Shimon, Shimon nevertheless heal him with life-saving medicine. In other words, if Shimon is the doctor and Ruvain is the patient, and Ruvain says, I don't want Dr. Shimon touching me, Shimon may nevertheless heal him with life-saving medicine. And this is not forbidden to the patient himself because it is a mitzvah. This is from Maimonides, that the physician is obligated. Now, when he says obligated, that's very strong wording, remember, by law to heal the sick of Israel. And this is included in the Sage's commentary, and you shall restore it to him. Now, restore it to him in that context has to do with a lost object. And the Bible and the Talmud goes into detail about how do you what is a, we have to define what is a lost object, how do you restore it, how much effort do you have to use, at what point, if you find something, can you keep it? That's the whole other issue. Fascinating one, by the way. That if he saw that he is lost and could save him, then he must save him with his body or his money or his knowledge. And Rabbi Golikin concludes, in other words, a doctor is obligated to heal, and this is a mitzvah. Okay, so now he's going to say, the question, general sources which require protecting the body, maintaining health. Again, seeing this not as an individual autonomous decision, but a larger decision that affects the community and the public in general. And how does that work? Okay. And we did it, by the way, we also did look at his response against smoking. So he's going to use, you remember, well, you may not, because I had to go back and look at this, that he will contend, along with many others, the question of smoking is that smoking is dangerous and should be forbidden. He'll come back to this issue because he likes to use that as an issue, because that's an issue that also has to do with public policy, right? What should be our public policy? I was in the gas station getting gas the other day, and I saw it said pack of cigarettes $14, and I'm saying, well, there's public policy, right?
Whoa.
They say,
$14.
$14 for a pack of cigarettes, huh?
Wow.
Why is that? Because the taxes are so high, and the public policy is we want to prevent people from smoking. Smoking causes disease. Disease creates costs for society in general. And therefore, we as a society in general need to see to it that smoking is not going to happen. And don't you see the public service ads on TV? You can give up, right? Those of you in New York and New Jersey, see the one about the guy, the garage mechanic guy? Have you seen that one? Okay, well, I watch television and see TV commercials sometimes. And it's again, why is the government spending money taking commercial time on television stations to promote people to stop smoking? Because it's seen it's not an individual, because if it was an individual autonomous decision, you let me smoke, I don't smoke, that's up to me. No, it's a public health issue. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
If we use the same Talmud as the Orthodox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talmud is Talmud. So how come in the very Orthodox community, they decide often not to get vaccinated when it clearly states that it's a community public health issue? How?
We're going to look very specifically at that. Okay. Good question.
I did read what you said, but I still, this is this conservative movement point of view, but they're quoting the Talmud, and everybody reads the same Talmud.
Well, yeah. Just minus that, we all read the same Constitution.
Well, that's true. Okay, you got me there.
We do read the same texts. sometimes it's in the interpretation, but there too, I thought you were going to ask me about smoking in the Orthodox community. Any of you who've traveled to Israel knows that smoking is still much more acceptable in Israel than it is in the United States. And there too, you might see that more common but we'll see some of the arguments. That's again a good, the parallel is an interesting one because the question is, is smoking an individual autonomous decision or is smoking a public health issue? Same thing, are vaccines an individual, right? You hear that discussion. Are vaccines an individual autonomous decision based upon my body? And then another question is, how dangerous is it, right? And when smoking was first introduced to Europe, right? Smoking isn't introduced until the discovery of the New World. Well, of Americas. Let's not get into an argument about New versus Old World. But if you're Native Americans, doesn't look that way. But the question was, and he'll use some of those parallels. The question is it a public health issue? How dangerous is it? Right? That's a question that is also being raised. And that question with smoking was raised also in not that long ago and there are some arguments we will see that he's bringing, which can be used from a public health perspective, which would be used in a much more different way than from an individual autonomous perspective, right? We'll see that. He's going to go through this in more than enough detail, as we will see. Okay. So protecting the body and maintaining health, right? Pikuach nefesh, saving a life, supersedes all the commandments in the Torah. We have seen that before. And that's he's going to show here, and we're going to go through some of these fairly quickly. You shall keep my statutes and my laws, which man shall do, and live by them. And if a person is commanded to transgress all the mitzvot in the Torah to save his friend's life, how much more so it is a mitzvah to get vaccinated in order to save his own life. Now, again, there are going to be people who will argue that being vaccinated does not save your life. We'll get to those arguments a little bit later. In other words, if pikuach nefesh supersedes Shabbat, kashrut, Yom Kippur, right? You get sick on Shabbat, you get in your car and you go to the hospital. No question. Almost all. Then how much more so does it supersede the infinitesimal risk? See below, he's going to talk about this, of getting vaccinated. No one is going to argue that getting vaccinated is without risk, but the question is going to be also, how great a risk is that? Okay. Then he's going to bring some other Talmudic texts to show about the importance of saving and keeping lives alive, right? Whoever sustains one soul is considered if he has sustained the whole world. That's quoted often. That's a very, it's in the Mishnah. It is in the context of a person who is going to be testifying in a capital case, to be warned that he should tell the truth in this capital case because what he says may involve the ending of a person's life. Okay. The world and its fullness belongs to God. Therefore, a person is not allowed to harm his body. There too, we have this question of radical autonomy. If your body is not yours to do with as you wish, traditional Judaism would say, for example, banning harmful structures, banning suicide is derives from this. And we would say banning tattoos, according to some. But the point is that your body is not yours. Okay. He has an interesting comment here from the Chafetz Chaim, very well known, very respected rabbi. Wrote against smoking before it was proven it's dangerous. Now, look at this man's life. He died in 1933. In 1933, very few people were sane, right? You saw that. Remember the ads when I was a kid? 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camels, right? Or whatever cigarette they were promoting at the time. Do you remember those ads? They showed a guy in a doctor's suit, a little stethoscope, and he's smoking away. Yeah. Okay. He heard that some doctors have decreed that anyone who is weak must not accustom himself to smoking, which weakens his powers and sometimes also harms his soul. But he's basically saying it's addictive. As a result, he protested to such weak people. Who allowed you to develop the habit? Okay, so you're susceptible to becoming addicted to this. Why should you even start? Although the sages said that a person who harms himself, even though he's not allowed, he is exempt, but exempt from punishment. But in any case, they said that he is not allowed to harm himself. First, because you shall guard your souls very much. In other words, you are forbidden from doing things that are harmful. Okay. And furthermore, it's logical. For the universe and its fullness belong to God. In his honor, he created us. And how will the slave be allowed to do as he pleases? Does he not belong to his master? Now, I mean, it's kind of an old-timey analogy. And if due to smoking his powers are weakened, he will certainly be prosecuted for it in the world to come. For he did it willingly and not by force. Nobody forced you to start smoking. Nobody forced you to do activities that are inherently dangerous. And even if you say, I just couldn't help it. Now, here we have to be a little careful because let's be honest, we now know that certain types of people are more likely to become addicted to certain things than others. There are genetic differences in the ways in which people become addicted to certain substances, and we should never be say, gee, why can't that person stop smoking? Doesn't he have enough willpower? Well, maybe he wasn't born genetically with that amount of willpower. But still, the point that the Chafetz Chaim is making is that nobody forced you to do something to harm your body. And you should always choose not to do things to harm your body. Similar idea, the Rabbi Seymour Siegel, one of my teachers at the Jewish Theological Seminary, conservative rabbi and scholar, a very, very interesting person, but that's for another time. Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, a very respected Orthodox. If we belong to God, we have no right to sabotage God's creation. Again, the argument is vaccines are going to make us healthy, and if we don't vaccinate, we are harming our bodies, okay? And he goes on, a healthy and whole body is the way of God. One must distance oneself from things that destroy the body and accustom oneself to things which heal the body. A person should never eat except when he is hungry, should not drink except when he is thirsty. He should not hold in his urine even one moment, but when he feels the need to urinate or defecate, he should do so immediately. That's Maimonides speaking, right? Keep yourself healthy. Okay. A Jew must guard his physical needs. This is again Maimonides. And so too, every stumbling block which is liable to kill, the positive commandment to remove it and to guard against it and to be very, very careful. Guard yourself. Okay. Some have learned that the verses give the obligation of maintaining one's health as a biblical requirement. Even so, if technically a Jew who has refused to be vaccinated does not violate a biblical commandment, he certainly violates the above verses according to the accepted interpretation for many generations that we are required to. Now this gets technical. Is it in the Bible? Is it in the Talmud? Still, it is a requirement. Okay. Many things have been forbidden by the sages because they entail sakanat nefashot. Now, recognize this is an earlier text. Again, Maimonides. A person is not allowed to put his mouth on a flowing pipe of water coming from the ground, or to drink at night from the rivers and lakes lest he swallow a leech, or drink uncovered water lest a snake drank from them, and the like. Now, these sound a little odd to us because these are things that none of us would even imagine doing. But remember, this is before the germ theory of disease. And it was recognized that doing some of these things were hurtful. Similarly, a person is not allowed to put coins into his mouth lest they have on them the dry saliva of people suffering from boils or of lepers. In other words, again, they knew nothing about germs, but they said, certain diseases might be spread in some ways. Okay. Similarly, it could be argued that the sages forbid only these things and that we should not add new prohibitions. Now, again, this is a good, interesting question here. The sages, okay, so I'm not going to drink water and worry about snakes and put a coin in my mouth. But vaccines are a new thing. It's not it because it is not mentioned by name in the Bible or the Talmud. Maybe it doesn't fit. Talk about ways of interpreting things. Because it's not mentioned there, this goes with the Constitution as well. If it's not mentioned in the original text, therefore there's no rule about it, right? But he points out by others, and therefore it's appropriate that he should pay attention to all things which may cause him harm. In other words, regarding our topic, anyone who refuses to get a vaccination and says, I'm endangering myself and what I do, and what do I care what others think? Again, the autonomous argument deserves lashes of rebellion, and whoever is careful about this will receive a good blessing. Okay. Even if 9 were not vaccinated and did not die, the 10th must get vaccinated. Now here they're using an argument about statistics, which is a little bit unusual. And you sometimes hear these statistics being quoted in these arguments. There are those who are opposed to vaccines, claiming there is no need to get vaccinated because many have not been vaccinated all their lives, yet died at a ripe old age, and therefore there is no definite danger, right? Oh, I lived to 95 and I smoked 3 packs a day. You can find people like that, right? I mean, it does happen. This is not correct. After all, we have learned in a Baraita in the Talmud, in connection with uncovered water, a barrel that was uncovered, even though 9 drank from it and did not die, a 10th should not drink from it. In other words, here they're denying this argument from the exception. And again, you hear this in the vaccination debate. I know, and you hear this in the vaccination debate and going the other way, right? I know someone who was vaccinated and had autism. Therefore, vaccines cause autism. This is the question of correlation versus causation. And here they're saying, no, there are odds that you have to take into right, Rambam. Even if others drink from the water and were not harmed, one may not drink from them. Therefore, even if there are 9 who have not been vaccinated and have not died, the 10th must be vaccinated because of possible. He's using this parallel between drinking from waters, which we would say have the possibility of having germs and other infectious agents within them. But he's saying the vaccination argument follows that. Okay. Danger is more serious than a prohibition. The claim that not getting vaccinated is not a definite danger, right? You can't prove for sure if I don't get vaccinated, I'm definitely going to get sick. No, we can't say that, can we? Is also pushed aside by the Talmudic principle. Danger is more serious than a prohibition. In other words, if there is doubtful impurity in a public place, it's considered pure, but if the water was left uncovered at night and a snake might have drunk from it, do not drink from it. And this is again by the Ramah. And so too should beware of all things that lead to danger, because danger is more serious than a prohibition. And one should be more careful about doubtful danger than a doubtful prohibition. So here's a question, I'm not sure whether this is absolutely prohibited, so I don't do it. But now we're saying, so here's something that's possibly dangerous, even more so. You should do that. Now, this is the last one we'll do today. One that does not rely on miracles. There are people, Jews and non-Jews, who believe that God will protect them and not let them get sick, right? Again, you hear this argument today. The Talmud says a miracle does not happen every day. Wasn't there a song in the Flower Drum song about 100 million miracles are happening every day? But okay, we'll put Rogers and Hammerstein aside. Okay, it is related in Kedushin about a man who climbed a ladder in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKain, sending away the mother bird before taking. All right, you see a nest, you want to send away the mother bird before you take the other birds in the nest, or the eggs to eat. And upon his descent, he fell. Among other things, this suggests the ladder was shaky, and thus its damage is established and well known. And wherever the damage is established, one does not rely on miracles. One does not say, just because I'm a good person, the shaking ladder is not going to fall for me. It is forbidden to rely on a miracle or to endanger his soul in such situations. It is forbidden to rely on miracles, and one must be vaccinated as soon as possible. Okay, time I see is up. Any comments or questions? He's making a very strong case. He's bringing pieces of the Jewish tradition to talk about you must guard your health, and you cannot put yourself in danger. Okay, comments or questions before we end? No? Okay, well, we'll pick this up. I do want to take a look at that question about why do we see in the Jewish community people who are vaccine deniers. And we'll also take a look at, I think I sent that article out, about how a doctor went to an anti-vax convention and tried to understand a little bit more deeply about what is motivating some of the anti-vaxxers. Okay, we're going to stop the share. Comments or questions, Rini?
Oh, I was just going to say, I wonder how those people feel, especially this past year in Texas when measles went wild, who didn't vaccinate their children and their children died.
Well,
I don't get it. Do they feel that a possible unproven side effect of a vaccine, it was totally proven that was not a danger. That person who gave that theory that all these vaccines cause autism, and it was proven it was wrong. And yet all these people, even today, don't vaccinate their children, and they're putting their children's lives in danger, and some of them die.
That is correct. So we have a very serious question of cognitive dissonance. Those of us who went to college at a certain time remember the book about When Prophecy Fails, about a group that believed the world was going to end. And they gathered together the night the world was going to end, and the world did not end. That did not stop them from still believing, okay, we got the date wrong. Okay, we didn't think the world was going to end, but this was going to happen. In other words, I would argue that there are cognitive processes going on, and even when objective reality seems to counter your belief, for some people, the belief overrides the reality, and they find either an alternative theory or some way of saying, oh, they had measles, but when they went to the hospital, it was the doctors who were treating the measles who caused the death.
Yes, I read that. Yes.
Yeah, you saw that. And
yeah.
Yes, to you and me and to most of us, that would sound, huh? But there they are. They are so invested in anti-vax that even something seen obvious, they find an alternative explanation. Ed? Yeah.
Yeah, more extensive example of what you just mentioned, Rennie, was the COVID vaccine.
Yes. Yes.
Where 90%, I believe, of the people that died in the hospital were unvaccinated. And then they were interviewing families and, what people went through. And they were saying, I should have got back. I should have got back. I should have got vaccinated. And there were a large number of them that you could see.
Right, but not all, right? We know that, again, this question, and this is a good question, which we'll see in this article. When people have a certain belief, which becomes sort of a core belief, it is hard to shake, even when objective facts go against it. But we'll take a look at that anyway. Everyone,
thank you.
Just one last comment on
yes.
People claiming that people died from the vaccine. Well, maybe some didn't. I think very few did, in my personal opinion. But do you have any idea how many people die in this country every year from a shot of penicillin?
That's a good question. I have no answer. Ed, I have a feeling you know.
500 people die every year in this country from penicillin.
Well, that people are allergic to penicillin may not be aware of it, correct?
Yeah, it's an anaphylactic shock. Now, do we get rid of penicillin?
No, well, see,
No, we test people.
there's the risk, the cost risk, um, you know, this issue, which I think is part of this as well. I don't want to take us for too long. Um, Everything is risky. And there are people who think, well, I'm going to remove the risk entirely, but then put themselves in greater risk, right? I mean,
Right.
this issue of risk, yeah, having your kid vaccinated, there is a minuscule risk, but is that enough to stop the other risk of having the disease and its consequences? We'll get into that at some point. Anyway, everyone, have a good day.
Thank you.
Coming.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We'll see you
Bye.
next
Thank
week.
you.
Bye.